planeta.
Damaging the planet.
Hemos sido testigos de soluciones eficaces, rechazar los plásticos de un solo uso, crear alternativas circulares y sostenibles, gestionar con mejor eficiencia los desechos plásticos. Juntos, diseñamos sistemas.
Together, we will design systems that can improve reutilization, reduction, and recycling. Let's demand governments and companies to act and to control and define new regulations. Let's think on the solutions. Let's take the decision for a world without plastic contamination. Let's deplastify in a better way. Good morning. I am Daniel Diaz from Pruma, and it's a pleasure to have you here for this second encounter of our route towards COP28. Today, we're going to talk about a mechanism that we think is very important, the carbon market mechanism. It is contemplated in Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Implementation of this article is very important for us and for the countries of the region. This brings a series of challenges and also opportunities that we're going to be talking about today. Without further preamble, I want to give the floor to Piedad Martin, that's a Joint Director for Latin America and the Caribbean from the PNUMA, so that she can give us some very small words of introduction so that we can start talking on this important subject. Thank you very much, Daniel. Good morning, everybody. So from the United Nations Program for the Environment and from our Office for Latin America and the Caribbean, I'm very happy to give you the introduction to this second dialogue of the route towards COP28. As Daniel was saying, in this occasion, we're going to talk about the implementation of the carbon markets of Article 6 of Paris Agreement. And our objective today is to explore what are these markets about, their benefits, but also the risks, the challenges, and the lessons we have learned that in a lot of cases we already have related to this topic, particularly from the perspective of our region. I want to thank all of the participants that are getting connected from different countries for connecting, not only as panelists, but also as audience. Your presence and your commitment are fundamental so that we can have this dialogue and that we can receive your comments and questions. And it is marking a milestone for our next COP that's going to be held in Arab Emirates this year. I think this is one of the issues where we already have agreements, but we are lacking the implementation. It is also one of the subjects that we're going to be discussing in the framework of the Minister Forum of Environment of Latin America and the Caribbean that will be held on October, along with the Climate Regional Week and previous to the COP. I want to acknowledge the presence of different officials in the government and our allies of private and civil society. Their participation demonstrate a shared commitment in order to look for solutions to the climate crisis that we are living today. I also want to thank the Green Fund because of its contribution of looking at the carbon markets in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I want to tell you what we're going to be doing with the fund. World is today against time in order to solve these carbon issues. Global heating has been a daily problem, and it has had repercussions that we are all feeling in all of the planet, but particularly in this region that is so vulnerable. Also, this year, we have several alert declarations in several countries of the region because of the Niño phenomena. It is obviously longer each year. So what we're seeing is that we are very far from giving a solution in terms of zero emissions, which makes it difficult for us to have this objective. However, we have to continue advancing. Each degree is worth it, and we are getting closer to these critical points. So we need to look at all of the mechanisms that we can use in order to erase the situation, and one of them is the sale market or the market sale carbon. One of the things we're doing is to fix the prices of carbon, and they reduced 60% in comparison to 2020, and we reached $84,000 according to the report of the World Bank, according to the prices of the carbon. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, in this sense, is used as a hope flag in order to look at all of the actors and encourage them to transcend all of the cross borders, to look at all of the different forums in order for us to do something about this problem. And in this spirit, we are going to look at this path in order to solve this problem and to look at the different cooperations that we can have in terms of the emission of carbon. The countries can look at the progress, at the environmental progress, inspiring a virtual cycle and more ambitious cycle, but we cannot forget the cycle that we have here. Article 6 is encouraging us to look at sustainable development to ensure that all of the actions can have benefits that are going further than the emissions of carbon. So we have to look at all of the opportunities to protect ecosystems and to create paths in order to have something better, because together, we can look at all this not only as a charge, but also as very positive changes. And when we are looking at this path, we have to maintain ourselves firm regarding environmental integrity. Article 6 demands us to have the highest standards of responsibility and transparency. So we have to come together in order to avoid the double counting and to avoid that the emissions are counted transparently in participation with the communities. We also have an application of a social safeguard of the participation of the communities that are more vulnerable, so that this can be a premise of the development of these instruments. Why are they important? According to Article 6 and cooperation mechanisms that it includes, more than 120 countries, that's about 80% of the contributions that are determined at a national level that have been presented in the convention, have expressed their interest in using Article 6 as a cooperation focus. So according to the negotiations of the Global Framework of United Nations, we deblocked all of the things that are related to this article and how it can operate. And several countries of the region are preparing themselves to implement this immediately. So we're going to see something of this today. According to the World Bank, the idea of charging the price for carbon emissions is a good strategy for reducing them. And all the regions are accelerating implementations of type of markets, but all of them are starting in many cases, because it is important to be cautious when implementing this properly, ambitiously, in order to plan the carbon so that we have incentives that can change the way of investing, of producing, of consuming, and not of having a green worship, so that the carbon market can have a significant impact. All the initiatives must be proper, and this is something that we're going to be talking about. This implies to fix a minimum price for carbon that can at least be of $30, $50 per ton of emissions reduced in case of forests. Currently, this price is lower, so it is not creating the sufficient incentive so that the protection of forests can come into these type of compensations. We also require all of this to ensure that all of the citizens can participate so that we can implement protection mechanisms so we don't have losses, so we don't have these type of processes. This can close the emission gap. We think that they can contribute to 4 to 5 tons of CO2 of reduction on an annual basis up to 2030. So this implies to save 40 to 70% of the costs when we have to implement these kind of emissions at a national level. The carbon markets, not only the fulfillment, but also the voluntary markets, can also close the financing gap and generate these additional benefits. Particularly, they have grown a lot, going from $520 million in 2020 to do $2,000 million in 2022. So they also provide this type of financing for the development of renewable energies and emissions that are based on nature. In brief, I think it can play a very fundamental role so that the governments and the private sector can comply with their commitments in the NSDs of zero emissions, as the Intergovernmental Panel has recommended on climate change. Before finishing, I wanted to tell you why we're working on these subjects. Latin American and Caribbean region has a huge potential to develop this market because of the forests, its languages, and also the potential of developing clean energies. We think it is the moment of triggering a change with a major determination of 33 countries of the continent. All of them are considering the markets and carbon under Article 6 as a strategy to comply with all of this objective. But only 4 countries have been adjusting their policies, in this sense: Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Brazil. Currently, we have a lot of challenges related to this. For example, limitations in terms of capacity, the develop of institutional frameworks and legal frameworks that make it difficult to implement these. All of these instruments are related to the market. Regarding the governmental actions and mitigation, sometimes we need clarity on the roles, and we need to standardize all of this, the verification, the validators, and the accreditation institutions that have a very important role in guaranteeing the quality and the control of all these mitigation actions. All of the coordination mechanisms in terms of the regions are limited. We can do a lot more in cooperation, in knowledge exchange and coordination among the countries. We don't have quality standards that are defined yet, nor social safeguards. We have limited capacities for contamination. The monitoring capacities, they are being strengthened, but we need more, and we need a greater participation and a continuous participation of the interested parties or of the private sector, of indigenous communities, in order to participate collectively in these mechanisms. So we are launching at the beginning of this year a project, Readinet, from the Climate Green Fund, in order to create capacities in the implementation of carbon markets, Article 6, in 6 countries of Latin America: Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, República Dominicana. They're part of this project, and we have positions that have been published in order to have experts in these countries. So if you also can, make sure that they're spread, it would be great. We have also countries that are not yet in this project, but want to be included in this dynamic, such as Brazil and Belize, that we are going to be starting doing this through the Minister Forum of the Environment. So this project is going to promote milestone to these gaps. It's going to generate knowledge. It's going to generate technical and operational capacities to see, for example, how we have to update and how we have to implement the Article 6 at a national level, and what is common in the region, so that the systems can be interoperable, and also to look at the financing, the climate financing. That is something that is a problem in the region, of the importance that this gap can be fulfilled, so that we can have more ambition and to comply with all the requirements, the operational requirements of these markets. Some of them are existing, but others are emerging. So we are in an adaptation process at this point. So with this event, we want to continue the dialogue of the path towards COP28 with an issue that we think is very important: to review common challenges, to align focuses, to think a little bit about positions towards the COP. Today, we are ready to write this chapter towards resilience, towards the fight against the climate crisis. I think we have to take advantage of this moment by looking at this Article 6 without considering these challenges in the social context and the greenwashing risk, but looking at the potential of these mechanisms that they have in order to accelerate the action. So I'd like to end by thanking all of you, also to the Ambition Climate team of the PRONUMA office, and clearly the communication panel, for moderating this exchange space. And I hope that this space is very interesting, and I wish you a lot of success today. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And looking at your words, we wanted to highlight the subject of the difference of the focuses. So we want to invite Fabiana Rodriguez. She is the United Nations Framework for Climate Change, and she is going to tell us, give us some words that they have from the United Nations Secretary regarding Article 6 and the carbon market. So I'll give the floor to you, Fabiana, at this point. Thank you very much, Daniel. Good morning to all of the participants. It is a pleasure to be here again with you, collaborating with an event of the PNUMA colleagues. Thank you, Piedad, for these words that were so important at a very critical moment where we need a lot of help and collaboration so that the countries know about the markets. And it was very good to listen to all of the different progress and all the new initiatives that the PNUMA is supporting. I am Fabiana Rodriguez, coordinator for the Regional Collaboration Center for Latin America from United Nations for Climate Change. And I give you a welcome to this session where we are going to talk about the implementation of carbon markets in the Article 6, specifically on their benefits, risks, challenges, and lessons that we have learned for Latin America and the Caribbean. I would like to start off by telling you that collaboration regional centers, the RCCs, as they're more commonly called in Latin America, are a network of offices from the convention, from the climate change secretary that are operating in different regions of the world. We have 6 in total. But specifically talking, we have 2 here in Latin America and the Caribbean, one that is in Panama, and clearly we are here working with the colleagues from the PNUMA, and we have another office that is in the Caribbean, in Trinidad St. George's. These 6 centers of the convention are ensuring a regional presence that is closest to the governments, to NGOs, investors, multilateral banks, with the objective of supporting the implementation of contributions at a national level, the NDCs. This regional support is part of an effort of the Secretary to overcome barriers. As we already said, there is a lot we have to do in the region, and we have a lack of resources and technical capacities. So these aspects is something we want to unite on the part of the RCCs by helping the climate negotiations. In the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, we have the 2 centers that cover 17 Latin American countries and 16 countries in the Caribbean. And we are there in order to support you in whatever you may need. Mainly, I would like to talk a little bit about the focuses that we bring to the region, mainly to increase the comprehension to key aspects of negotiation, to facilitate the implementation of climate action and the collaboration and the local alliances. We also want to maximize the magnitude and extension of the commitment with climate action. So from the RCC of Latin America, we are here to provide practical assistance step by step, and we are committed in providing orientation and technical support to the parties. This year, we extended our regional work in order to include the support to adaptation, mitigation, transparency, implementation, media, which means financing, and also development of capacities and collaboration with all of the different parties that are involved. But this event is on carbon markets and Article 6, and this is one of the examples of the collaboration that we can provide to the parties that can strengthen the work program and the development of capacities on Article 6 that was launched in COP27 in Chambershape, and that will also be implemented by phases in a 5-year period. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement establishes a framework so that the countries can cooperate among themselves in the implementation of these NCDs through market mechanisms. These focuses, or these cooperation focuses, can allow countries to reach their objectives, their climate objectives under the NCDs by achieving a better ambition to mitigation and adaptation actions, especially mechanisms or market mechanisms are considered key focuses in order to achieve the reduction of emissions in a profitable way. They can also contribute to increase the participation of private sector in order to promote a sustainable development. The parties have much more interest in working in a cooperation in order to pursue their goals in this climate mission. According to the last report of synthesis of the NCDs, the majority of them, 81% of the parties, presented information on voluntary cooperation regarding Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And of this number, 76% declared or stated that they are planning or are going to do a voluntary cooperation. So the use of cooperation focuses is the one that they communicated more frequently. Likewise, 30% of the parties have established limits, qualitative limits, in the use of voluntary cooperation in order to achieve their NCDs and their mitigation objectives. We also had an increase of 49 to 82% of parties that communicated NCDs that were new or updated regarding the planned use or possible use of at least one voluntary cooperation. We have several data, and we are conscious that the parties have stated the need to strengthen their national capacities regarding the cooperation focus under the Paris Agreement, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, in order to go from the intention to the implementation of these action climate tools. For us, the empowerment of the parties is essential, especially for the countries that are developing, because they're going to be able to participate effectively in this global market of carbon, mainly without excluding international mitigation goals that the OACA is aspiring to, which is the market under the aviation system. Finally, we are convinced that the cooperation focuses that have been proposed under Article 6 are useful tools for governments, for private sectors, and for other key actors that will help them to advance with their NCDs. From the Secretary, we are committed to accelerate these actions, to join forces in order to be able to achieve these efforts in these multiple consultation processes with the parties. We have focused our efforts in the work program in order to develop the capacities of Article 6 through the regional centers along with our PNUMA colleagues. For example, we can strengthen infrastructure that is necessary in order to participate in these market processes with cooperation focuses by extending knowledge and by helping the countries to take decisions that are much more informed regarding this subject or issue. I hope this session can be of a lot of interest to you and that you are looking at all of the activities of the work program for the development of capacities that is stated in Article 6. Please don't hesitate in contacting our collaboration centers for Latin America. We have an expert that is going to talk, that is Ana. She's going to talk further today, that is the expert regarding Article 6 in our office. And we also have other experts along with the PNUMA that are dedicated to support these issues regarding Article 6. Thank you very much for your participation, and I'll give the floor to Daniel. Have a good day. Fabiana, thank you very much. You mentioned that it's very important that all of the sectors are involved in this. So today we have a guest that we consider is very important. It is Sebastián Carranza. She comes from the public sector because he's the director of climate change of the Minister of the Environment in Colombia. Sebastián, welcome. And I wanted, without a further preamble, to start with a question. How do you consider that the carbon markets can contribute to accelerate the transition towards low carbon emission economies? Daniel, good morning. Good morning, all of the people that are joining this transmission. It is a great pleasure to be here with you, to be able to share these impressions regarding an issue that in general terms is very controversial. I think that Piedad and Fabiana's words have been very clear in giving us this context around what this supposes. I would like to say hi to all of the PNUMA team, to all the Transparency and Climate Ambition team. Thank you very much for inviting us to this space. Well, How can this help us to accelerate the transition? I think that yes, as a matter of fact, the resource of Article 6 and the carbon market must have a focus in environmental integrity and social integrity. The mitigation results that can be eligible through these tools. If we do not have a look on the social metrics regarding how these instruments can contribute to preserve nature, to preserve ecosystems, to be able to have effective reductions of greenhouse gases, to have the center, the nature as a center and the atmosphere, and at the same to have the center looking at the people that coexist with all the different forest projects, with all of the different infrastructure and renewable energy projects, or with transformation projects of our energy matrix and our transportation system, then it's not going to be very useful if this does not happen in this direction. We see this with a lot of urgency here in Colombia, that the starting point of this conversation is the social integrity and the environmental integrity of these mechanisms. And it's here where we see its real contribution towards transition. We are walking from which point to which point. We are walking from a point where we are depending on fuel combustion to a scenario where we have justice, climate justice regarding the environment. This is, in essence, what we perceive from here. What is the contribution that these kind of tools can make or give to the economies and to the transition of economies? Okay, Sebastian, so you mentioned there is a contribution to economies. Do you see that the carbon markets can help in innovation issues in different sectors, not only in the transition towards the climate change, but also so that the economies can start looking at working lives, and that we can open some spaces and that we can diversify this and possibly to have new work positions, elements that can help us to dynamize economies in Latin America, for example? Yes, of course. I think that this overview of technological transfer, this view of knowledge transfer, of how the development of projects that can generate eligible unities for Article 6 is associated to applying new technologies, is also talking a lot about the forest sector, and think that we can have mitigation results that can be transferred at an international level, that can come from the transfer of technology in the transportation sector and the energy sector, and all of these types of benefits in the mitigation in countries that are in development, that they're taking decisions of where they must look at the development of our economies and our societies, can necessarily generate these innovations. We have a lot of developed countries and countries where today mitigation have an effective cost that is very high to reduce emissions in a developed economy and a stable economy, where their technologies, their transportation technologies or production technologies in the industry are very well consolidated. And this can also generate a space of bringing all of these reduction emission ways, these generated technologies of a low carbon economy, to the countries that are under development. There's an opportunity here, and I think this is part of the rules of how an eligible project to Article 6 is a project that can contribute to the permanency. I think that this is, in essence, something that is referring to other two complementary principles. And in my first intervention, I talked to you about social and environmental integrity, and where you're asking, Daniel, of how it can generate innovation and transform our economies, I would talk about the permanence and additionality, how these tools can allow us to accelerate the arrival of technologies and practices that are going to improve in the use of energies, and improving our transportation systems and the use of our water residues in countries where today this is a problem, and where if we continue on this line, we're not going to be able to achieve an effective climate action. So I think it's all about involving all of these additionality and permanence elements that is going to allow us to look at the carbon market as a resource for innovation. Thank you. And During today's talk, we have mentioned that there are certain challenges and that Article 6 has had certain controversies. So could you please give us the perspective or the addition you'd like to do in this issue or matter? Yes, of course. To Daniel and to the audience, I think that the controversies are several here. The Paris Agreement and the legal language that is behind this, behind Article 6, is very clear related to the fact that this is a cooperation way of reaching the effectiveness in the gases of making this 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is the first rule. We have to reduce the emissions. We cannot just look at this one-to-one. It's not about compensating or mitigating on one hand and capturing on the other. It is not a one-to-one relationship, definitely. Article 6 and the international transfer of mitigation results is not looking towards displacing the emissions, or it's not looking towards having somebody in a scenario of the intensity of emissions of greenhouse gases, while on the other hand, they are reducing it. I think that this is wanting us to mobilize globally towards a fulfillment of 1.5 degrees. This is something that has been clear in the report, indicating that the challenge is huge, that we don't have we don't have space in the atmosphere to have this greenhouse effect. So it's of no use that other economies are generating big amounts of greenhouse gases and have a very high dependency in the fuel combustion, while on the other hand, we have a compensation of a one-to-one relationship and very concrete results. Article 6 is not useful to the greenwashing, and this is the first controversy. And the second thing is that a lot of these projects are developing in forest environments or in the development of very big infrastructure projects, for example, renewable energies, and the application of social and environmental safeguards is absolutely urgent. It is highly necessary to have a safeguard framework that is clear, that can protect the rights of communities and that can protect ecosystems, that can ensure us integrity, as I said, the social and environmental integrity from a social safeguard perspective. There has been a very great advance in the application of safeguards, but it doesn't make any sense that a mechanism that is looking towards contributing to sustainable development and that is looking towards solving inequities, the two greatest accelerators of global crisis, that is inequity and poverty. We cannot be generating this as an externality of projects. It's not like we can be generating a greater poverty or greater inequity. And what cannot happen here is that we're maybe contributing to environmental crisis regarding the development of these kind of projects. So in these terms, the safeguard application is fundamental. Okay, so these are two elements that we have to highlight, the greenwashing and the safeguards. So Sebastian, thank you very much for being here with us today. Now I want to give the floor to Emilia Anselmo from the PNUMA, because we're going to have a discussion panel in order to see different points of view regarding this very important subject. So Emilia, I'll give the floor to you. Good morning. Thank you very much, Daniel. Very good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for being here with us in this event. I'm part of the Climate Emission Transparency of the United Nations. Our first panel is going to focus on the market carbons and their impact in communities and in the necessary safeguards in order to guarantee them. We are going to have the participation of experts in the field of market carbon or carbon markets regarding these very important issues. So today we have Martín Pérez, that's a Director of Monitoring and Impact of Solutions that are based in nature. We also have Anahim, that is analyst of the SICA Center, and Susana Vélez, the senior manager of VETA. So all of these panelists are going to contribute with a unique vision regarding these emissions. So to give a little bit more context regarding what we have been talking from the beginning of the event, I would like to start off the conversation by asking Martin, if you could please tell us which are the positive and negative impacts that the carbon markets can have, and why do we have so much controversy regarding this issue? Good morning, all of the audience, to everybody. The main positive aspects from my perspective regarding the carbon market is that they're very efficient. If we look at the different maps where we have the projects and the communities that they're looking at, we see that there are mechanisms that are reaching a lot of issues regarding the interaction and monitoring within private actors, and it has a very high efficiency in the terms of resources when it's based in transaction rules among private parties. The look towards a financing is much more efficient, and I think this is the main advantage. Mobilization and financing data clearly are giving us information on the millions of dollars that have been able to be given through this mechanism. Because of this same efficiency and because of the nature of the task, that is to look at emission sources. We have also some challenges, and this is the second part of the question. And we also have reactions regarding the market actors. So the challenges, I think, and I would look at is in two different components. The first is accounting alignment challenges, because different systems that are measuring carbon, and we have a global discussion, if we're looking at the same thing or a different thing, if we should have double accounting, for example, among mechanisms that are formulated from the Paris Agreement Article 6 and the voluntary market, what we have today on the paper is not including an integration. So Article 6 is not looking at the voluntary market, but we have some challenges in the implementation because the countries listen to this and are proposing agenda in order to monitor carbon. So there is a need of strengthening these capacities for the structuring of these accounting framework. And the second challenge that I'd like to mention is the relationship with communities. A great part of results, according to the last data, this is not the offer of reduction of emissions for the voluntary market. So we don't have data regarding Article 6 because we're still starting its implementation. So this category, among other categories, we still have relationship with other communities in residues and infrastructure and energy, but in the sector of the use of the floor, that is much more important and direct. How do private actors relate themselves to communities? Because there's a symmetry in the knowledge. The communities have certain challenges in understanding and in assuming the governance of the different mechanisms, and the private actor comes with an agenda and with a previous knowledge that is much more structured. So clearly here we have certain tension in the interactions. So here we also have an opportunity. We have good projects, we have bad projects. Looking at all these fields, or these two fields, I see these as challenges, more talking from the perspective of voluntary market, and some lessons that we have learned that we have to look at for the implementation of the cooperation mechanisms. Thank you very much, Martin, for the contribution. So looking at the first part of your response where you mentioned what we need for environmental integrity in terms of carbon emission, my following question is for Susana. Could you please tell us how we can ensure the environmental integrity in the carbon markets and to avoid double accounting and lack of transparency? Thank you, Emilio. Thank you very much for the invitation to this space. Okay, we have three specific issues: integrity, double accounting, and lack of transparency. And even though they're all in a package, they have different ways to tackle them, from the standards that allow the certifications of the carbon projects. The first thing is that for the integrity, we have to generate conservative methodologies. So each time methodologies can allow us to do the calculations of carbon credits that are generated in the projects, they have to be much more conservative, and they have to be updated with the last scientific data. So this also generates a very big discussion, because to update a methodology is not happening from one day to the other, and it requires discussions with experts, with government, with national data, in order to ensure methodologies that are being applied can have the environmental integrity for those carbon credits that are being generated for any type of market or claim, so that they're real and that they're contributing positively to the fight against climate change. And also for us, it is very important to have an updating process of national data so that we can have greater trust in the different calculations that we do at a national level. Why? Because the standards, we have a global way of tackling them, where we have to generate rules that can be applied in all the world. But for us, it is very important to have these national data, or this national data, that are trustworthy and that are official, so that we can have do comparisons among the different projects that are being developed. For the double accounting issue, it is very important that the national registries are connected to registries with the standards of voluntary markets. We are migrating towards a market that is homogeneous with rules that are different, but here we have to start to tell the same story in the same way. So we have to homogenize these accounting or these national accounting process with the accounting processes of the project with clear rules and times so that we can all look at this in the same way regarding the accounting process. And we have proposed very new proposals for the market where we have included a label or a last name to the carbon credits depending on for what they're going to be used, depending on how they are being accounted. For example, if they have adjustments, this will depend on each country, of course, if they can be used with a mechanism or with another mechanism. And this is going to contribute to the transparency to this accounting process. And it's not going to let us count this twice. And for the lack of transparency, it is very important to have clear rules of what we want to say and how we want to say it. Sebastian was talking about this very clear on the safeguards. The report systems for safeguards of countries are not ready on all of the cases. So we are reporting this in a different way in each case. So if we are able to standardize what information we're going to report and how are we going to report it among standards, countries, programs, governments, and type of markets, then it's going to be a lot easier to do the follow-up and to be more transparent at the time we're communicating the information that we have. Thank you very much, Susana. Without a doubt, as a response to this situation, we have a high interest in an agenda in order to be able to improve the integrity of carbon markets and the quality of the reports that we have. And this I understand because of what we have been talking. This implies to include safeguard elements, also measures in order to prevent the impacts. But I also understand that in the region, the safeguard situation varies and its fulfillment is not always consistent. So my following question is for Anahim from the CCAP. Could you please tell us a little bit on your work area? What is the state in safeguards in the region? Hi, everybody. Yes, the first thing is we have to define what are social and environmental safeguards for the audience. Basically, there are tools, there are alignments and requirements that are being established through different funds and institutions, through different programs to basically prevent and mitigate potentials and alternatives that can contribute to the implementation of emission projects in the case of voluntary carbon markets. So this could include different categories, social and environmental cases. It could include biodiversity, of territorial rights, of indigenous communities, local communities, and other issues such as benefit distribution, labor conditions, among other things. So in our case as CCAP, we have been studying specifically with other actors and with the United Nations programs for the environment. We have been studying the relationship of communities with the reduction emission project in the case of voluntary market for Latin America and the Caribbean. And with this, we also have been studying the safeguards. And at this moment, what we could find is that basically safeguards depend or are defined a lot by the certification program under which the program is crediting their credit carbons or the carbon credits. So what we saw is that these safeguards present a lot of differences, as Susana mentioned, regarding the deepness with which they are described, the mechanism so that they can become cooperations, and basically the mechanism, the monitoring mechanism, when they are being taught or when these projects are being implemented. Something important that we have also seen is that these safeguards in the region can be divided in two different ways, depending on their certification program, their macro program, in the case of FERRA or standard or biocarbon, or there's also cases where these safeguards are not described at a macro level, but also at a methodology level. For example, we have the case of the Forestry Protocol of Mexico, or the READY methodology the Sir Carbono methodology, where basically these two ways, in a way, we are describing general safeguards depending on the certification program. In this case, for example, all the programs of all sectors are fulfilling these safeguards that are looking at different levels by each certification programs. And we have the other part where we have the specific methodologies with specific protocols for a country, as the one they mentioned, the Forestry Protocol of Mexico, or for example, in this case, it describes 14 social safeguards and 7 environmental safeguards. And here we describe not only the safeguards, but it also has a lot of description of how it becomes operable or how it is monitored and verified in the case of the responsibility of the validation organism. So I could say that at this point in the region, safeguards is something that is aligned or related to how certification programs and methodologies that are developed can establish these alignments and requirements depending on the type of project that is being developed. Thank you very much. So if you respect these safeguards according to the research the SICA is doing, are you respecting them? Yes, really, this is a very subjective issue, because if we look at it, if they're being respected theoretically, or of what is regarding what is being written in the different documents of development of the project, you could say that yes, because this is a step that must be fulfilled in order to register or to have a validation for a project or verification for a project. But here we would be guiding ourselves regarding the scope of this research that we have been doing. We would be guiding ourselves by these theoretical part, what is being written regarding the project design that we know as PDD. At a practical level, I wouldn't dare to say if they're respected 100% in the implementation. I think that the implementation is in the hands of organisms or actors as a project developers, the ones that are doing the validation and verification of this project, and the certification program under which the project is being developed, because they are the people that are establishing these guidelines. So something that could be improved in a certain sense to see or to validate this respect to the safeguards is to have some projects that can help us to identify or to look how they're being applied, to have a direct communication with communities and to identify in the practice how this works. And I think that's something that will also help us to respect them, is the insertion of these 3 actors of the private sector, the civil society, the OBB, the developer of the project, and the certification program. But it would also help to have a public actor or private actor to look at the safeguards locally, because it can vary depending on the context of each country. So we know that we are a little bit more developed in Latin American countries from the safeguard system perspective, with all that includes the red mechanisms, but we are lacking this kind of bond between the ones that are already developed with the ones that we're looking at the voluntary market, clearly from the perspective of Article 6. It is very interesting, Anna. Thank you very much. So I understand that in order to advance in this issue, it's going to be fundamental to promote the insertion of criteria and mechanisms that can tackle inequities and can promote equity in the distribution of benefits. So I wanted to ask Martin if you think that the actual regulations of voluntary carbons are necessary or are enough to guarantee this among communities, and how we can advance in the framework of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. There is a call from different references added up to what we can understand as safeguards and the methodological frameworks of standards. We have other type of callings, other type of criteria that are parallel. We have national regulations that are not developed completely. We have national reports that the countries are doing, where they report systems of how they are looking at the safeguards for the Varsavia network. That is another mechanism that cannot be understood as the same voluntary market. But here there is a reference that the standards are taking in order to structure their safeguards internally. And we have international bodies that are governance bodies as the International Initiative for the Integrity of Voluntary Carbon Markets that are including in their environmental integrity criteria very agreements that are just. Clearly, this is not protocolized or developed, and there are no methods to say this is fair, this is no fair, for example. We have some reference regarding critical studies that say, for example, there is a problem with distribution of benefits that could make an emphasis in the local governance and in investments to be better distributed, where the great part of resources are not created in the intermediate phase, but is not protocolized. So from WWF Colombia, have written a guideline that is called Fair Agreements in Network Agreements, and we have been discussing the ways of how we can implement this among voluntary sectors with this agenda during this year, and we hope that this can create an impact in methodological markets, not only in national regulations, but also standardized and also bodies, local governance bodies. So I think this is a result. I think that we have to make a column to look at what this means. So we make a very first proposal of what we understand as just and fair, but clearly the other thinking centers, here there is an open discussion, and I think that it is worth it to discuss what do you consider as fair in an ample framework of safeguards. Thank you, Martin. If you could afterwards share this through the chat, what do you understand as fair treatment? I would really thank you. I understand that also, other than the mechanism that the carbon markets can use for safeguards, they also look at public policies, because they're the ones that establish the standards and the requirements in order to ensure protection of human rights and the environment and the reduction emission projects. So I have another question for you, Martina. If you could please tell us, what do you think is the role of public regulations, the fulfillment of safeguards for voluntary markets, and if this would be the same for Article 6? Article 6 is not covering a voluntary market. We have to say this in all of the events, because here we have an understanding that is really confusing when we start to talk about national frameworks. But there's a calling to the creation of registries and procedures, approval procedures of results that are able to be transferred internationally. What is happening is that when the country is looking at all these systems, it looks at the way it can do the accounting, at the different approval process, and it includes rules with the voluntary market that is different than the mandatory regulation that is covering voluntary markets. So when this happens, and when the regulation frameworks are looking at the challenge of regulating voluntary markets, there is a possible damage and there is a potential advantage. The possible damage is that in the first response that I gave, clearly I was highlighting the advantages of voluntary markets. So in no other scenario, national markets should affect what is working well. This efficiency and the financing, the capacity of reaching places where the government is not, or where the government can't reach, but they can offer a counterbalance to the private actor change that sometimes does not work completely well. In the case of safeguards, it is very interesting how the countries could formulate safeguards and could offer an independent focus on the market and a support to vulnerable communities and looking at complaints. And I would recommend for them to focus in a typical projects to looking at not what is working well, but offering an option if a project is not working well, so that the community cannot go and file a lawsuit, but there is also already a project regarding these complaints and the public capacities to simply stop these projects that are atypical. This would maintain an efficient operation of what is working well in the market, but it would also give a counterbalance of an external actor that, because of its definition, is independent. That would be the public sector. So there is a very big opportunity that is being promoted since Article 6, but is not being totally implemented. Excellent, Martin. So in the voluntary market and in the framework of Article 6, public regulations are fundamentals in order to ensure transparency and equity of these processes. Thinking a little bit about the role of national standards as key actors in all of these emissions, I would like to ask Susanna, if you could please tell us, how can international standards such as VERA cooperate in the respect of human rights in local communities and in the fulfillment of safeguards during the development of emission reduction projects? Yes, Amelia. Well, within the standard and within certain methodologies that we have to fulfill the Cancun safeguard, especially when we are talking about red mass issues, but we are also being other type of metrics in order to see how we can evaluate the evolution of the markets and of the projects in order to guarantee the respect of the rights of these communities to have a transparency in the information, that we have an open communication with the projects in order to look at all these needs, because sometimes when we're not present there 100%, then we cannot identify them. We also have a regulation, and all of the projects have to follow national legislation, including the safeguards that the countries may have, and they must report this to safeguard national systems if they exist. So this is why I told you previously that for us it is very important that the governments can give us clear rules of how to report and what to report, so that we can generate this standardized information. Additional to this, we work hand in hand with different governments in order to ensure that the reports that are being generated within the projects that are developing in these countries, that are being developed in these countries, can fulfill the needs of the countries, so that we can be able to guarantee that they're going to be fulfilled, that the protection requirements to these communities are going to be fulfilled. And this is something that we're doing regarding human rights. We have very complex situations in territories where we cannot guarantee human rights for these communities, but we do our best effort. And this is why, regarding standards, regarding the carbon standard, some mechanisms regarding complaints that allows us to receive complaints, specific complaints, so that we can understand what is happening in the projects. And this goes hand in hand with a detailed review of the projects, interviews with the actors, even visits. For example, Raja's team went there. That was something that we did not do for some time because of certain situations. And we also have sanctionary actions to these projects that are not working properly. If you look at the registry, we have several projects that are on hold. We have several projects that have been rejected by Berra because they do not fulfill requirements that we are fixing. And for us, it is very important to have not only clear rules, the interior of standards, but the way we are reporting this. A year and a half ago, all of the projects have to also report the safeguards and the contributions to sustainable development with some metrics that have been established, with some reports that have been established, which also allows us to do a follow-up, not only to the network projects, but also to all the other projects, guaranteeing not only the benefit because of the capture or remotion of greenhouse gases, but also which are these co-benefits that the projects are generating. Thank you very much, Susanna, for such a complete answer. Thank you for sharing a little bit of what Vera is doing in the region regarding these issues. The last question is for Anna to finalize this panel. Could you please tell us how you can empower interested parties and the activities of reduction of emissions, reducing the participation alongside the cycle of the project, the life cycle of the project? Okay, I think that a very important part of involving, or when you have to involve these parties regarding communities or civil society of countries, I think that the first thing and the most important thing is to train them so that they understand the topic, because a lot of situations when we're here in the market or the carbon market, we don't think that everybody knows about it. So it's very important to train the different actors, specifically the ones that can be most vulnerable in this issue and the carbon markets. What type of projects can be given, for example, in this location, in these type of communities, the type of agreements that can be there, the social and environment safeguards that can be applied depending on the certification program or depending on the standards that they're going to be following. So these would be their minimum rights, so that they can understand that this exists and that they can, demand this. And also to educate them regarding, for example, the benefit distribution so that they can be there. On one hand, this is very important to educate different actors and different communities. And on the other hand, I think that another way of involving these communities is to, have different alliances so that we can cooperate with organizations that have made advances with these communities in the different countries. For example, to do the mapping of all these communities and to understand them. So we have a project along with WWF that Martin is here, where we want to bring this knowledge to communities in the Pacific coast of Colombia, and WWF has progress in the knowledge of these communities. So they have been working hand in hand with these communities, and this allows us to know the different needs that these communities may have and to do a more tailored made package regarding what areas have to be trained in these communities so that they can have their own criteria based on the decision taking process of these projects, or when these different actors are approaching them to take decisions regarding a project that is being developed in their communities. So these would be two ways where 100% they could have a collaboration in terms of local actors. Excellent. Thank you very much, Anna. So it is fundamental to continue working in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean in order to identify actors and create different capacities and to support the countries so that they can ensure social equity and environmental integrity and carbon markets. So thank you very much to our panelists for being here with us today and to all the people that are connected. We hope that this day continues being an opportunity to learn, to have new ideas, to explore innovative solutions. And without further preamble, we can continue with this event. Thank you. Thank you, Emilia. And here we're going to bring new voices. Miriam Holdes of the PNUMA. He is a person in charge of the transparency and climate section. He can bring another perspective to this discussion. So William, I give the floor to you at this moment. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you. So for us, it is an honor from PNUMA to be able to have these spaces and to share with you different experiences and lections that we have learned or lessons that we have learned regarding the transparency framework of the Paris Agreement, specifically on the collaboration focuses that Article 6 of Paris Agreement is stating regarding the carbon markets. By highlighting the key points that they have already mentioned, the colleagues have already mentioned, I think that social and environmental integrity associated to environmental safeguards, such as the case that we are looking at with RED and countries, for example, just by giving some specific examples, but understanding that this is a pathway that we should improve in a collective way as a region. Also, the focuses in human rights and vulnerable communities, overall indigenous communities in certain regions that are clearly receiving the biggest climate effects in our countries, and these countries that are developing themselves, countries under development in Latin America and the Caribbean. So they are basically bringing us to this panel with different colleagues and experts that are working directly in the fields in different countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I really like to open this space so they can share different experiences regarding these advances that they have witnessed when they work with the regions. We have Daniela Suner, that is an expert in carbon markets for Central America. Daniela is a consultant for our company. She's been working with 5 countries in the Latin American region by strengthening their systems and then the implementation in these countries, and also with a preparation focused towards carbon markets. Daniela, welcome. And I want to start off with a question. Which would be the challenges that the countries are facing, the countries that have limited mechanisms based in the carbon prices, basing ourselves in a fair implementation of these mechanisms, including Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, according to your experience in Central America? Thank you very much, Billy. Thank you, everybody that are here with us today. And thank you to all panelists with which I have the honor of sharing this space. Responding to your question, Billy, if we look at Latin American region, we're going to find a lot of experience in price instrument or prices for carbon. There are countries that have implemented carbon taxes, countries that have carbon taxes. This flexibility mechanism can compensate this payment. Countries that are developing a national carbon market, countries that have their own accreditation mechanisms of projects that are generating credits or loans. There are countries in the region that have a voluntary program regarding these greenhouse gases, where the entities that are participating in the compensation stage can do this with carbon loans or credits. All of these mechanisms that have been being implemented are coming with a lot of capacities and developments that we have had to do in order to ensure these mechanisms and make them functional and cooperational. We have to ensure these legislation frameworks that can activate these requirements and to have clear rules and regulations for all the people that are participating, in addition to excellent monitoring systems, report and verification system, because if we don't have an MRE system, we cannot have a market or a market mechanism that can ensure what we have been talking about today. These actions can basically lead to the reduction of the greenhouse gases. Other than these experiences, majority of the countries have participated in carbon voluntary markets, in network mechanisms, and in the clean mechanisms. But now the story is changing, and we are in the transition process of MLG towards what is going to activate the Paris Agreement. That is the framework that is going to activate Article 6 that we have been talking about today. But under Article 6, the role that governments have to have and the requirements that they have to fulfill in order to use these mechanisms generated by Article 6 are very big. These are requirements. We have to do reports. We have to have a good MRD system. And here we see these challenges that all of these countries are facing at a national level and international level. But maybe countries that have had less experience in carbon markets or in the implementation of mechanisms that are based on markets are facing additional challenges, starting off by the strengthening of MRD in order to participate in Article 6 or to implement these mechanisms, because at a long run, these mechanisms are options that countries can have. So it is important to strengthen these MRD systems and to ensure their compliance. Another challenge that countries are being faced with currently in order to implement these mechanisms is to define what are they going to be using them for. These mechanisms are implemented as a purpose in order to define it, and it is important to define it so that the implementation of these mechanisms can contribute to reaching these national goals that have been established in the NDC and in the other mechanisms that have been defined by all the other countries. So we have to understand how we're going to bond these mechanisms or link them with these climate goals. Additional to this, we have all the legislation framework or activation framework in order to implement these mechanisms at a national level so that they can fulfill these specificities that we have seen today. And what is important here is that even though we have these legislations at a national and international level, we have to implement this at a national level in order to ensure that this activating framework that we're going to implement at a national level can help to fulfill this. For what? or for what are the countries are going to use these mechanisms. So a lot of these countries are identifying and defining what are these elements that they have to have, these frameworks, and what are going to be the best pathway in order to implement them. Added to this, we have technical capacities and the number of people that we need in order to operate these mechanisms. And a lot of countries, we see that they are strengthening the teams that are responsible for these issues, because other than looking at these issues that are related to market mechanisms, they have to look at other aspects that are related to climate change. And this is a constraint in the amount of time that they can dedicate to these issues, that from a technical perspective can have a high degree of complexity and can demand a lot of time. So there are a lot of challenges that the countries are facing when they're making use of these mechanisms or using them. However, each of these challenges is an opportunity. And I think that as a region, this richness, the richness of this experience that are along all of these regions is generating a very beautiful opportunity of implementing this in order to contribute to the acceleration of the implementation in all of the countries simultaneously. Thank you very much, Daniela, for your response. I think that we agree in two aspects that you have mentioned in your intervention regarding legal frameworks and activating conditions that are allowing countries to develop these carbon market systems and these cooperation mechanisms in Article 6 for emissions, for gas emissions, and also to have MRD systems that are robust and that are part of Article 13 of Paris Agreement, so that these emissions can be reduced, are additional and integral to these aspects and social aspects as we have been seeing. So I would like to ask a question to our colleague Ana Dominguez, that is an expert in carbon markets for Latin America and the Caribbean. Ana, so we had an intervention from Fabiana Rodriguez at the beginning of the event regarding the role that the regional center has for Latin America regarding the implementation of Article 6. But we would like to ask you a little bit more. What are the challenges that you see as a convention regarding the implementation of Article 6 in the region, and how they would contribute to these goals that are established in the countries of the region? We are looking at this at a long term, which is another issue that you're dealing with and that you're trying to tackle with directly from the convention. Thank you, Vili, for this important question. It is very important. First of all, I want to thank Regional Office of Latin America and the Caribbean of the PNUMA for this invitation. And I want to introduce myself. I am with the team, the Regional Cooperation Center on Climate Change for Latin America. These regional centers, as Fabiana mentioned in her intervention, are part of a network of regional offices of the Secretary of the Convention with the purpose of approaching the labor of the Convention to governments and entities and actors in general in order to overcome barriers and to overcome constraints and to take advantage of opportunities in order to ensure a successful implementation of all the instruments of the Convention, including the Paris Agreement and the NCDs. So in the region and in the countries of the region, we see a lot of challenges. We see the implementation and the participation of the countries in Article 6, basically in three phases. The preparation phase, as Daniela mentioned, the countries are going to have to fulfill certain requirements. The implementation phase, that is how we can identify and select these activities that are going to participate using these cooperational focuses, and so that they can be aligned to the fulfillment of climate goals that have been defined by the RCC and the monitoring and following up phase. So in each of these phases, we can see that there are several challenges for all the countries, but the question now, and I would like to focus myself, is if the countries are really prepared in order to participate and use these focuses, these cooperational focuses. So one of the points that I like to mention a lot is that this has been part of, the different surveys and regional dialogues that the Secretary of the Convention has had as part of the launching process of the working programs of the capacities that is included in Article 6 that was launched in COP27. And one of the points that's highlighted by the parties is that they have a low understanding of all of these objectives that are mentioned in Article 6. And for us, it is very important. Knowledge is power, and it grants an empowerment to different governments in order to take decisions with total trust. And we know that there is a big concern of the governments because of the fulfillment of climate goals that are highlighted under their NDCs based on the uncertainty of being able to participate in these cooperational focuses if they commercialize, if they don't fulfill the goals, if they commercialize more than they should. So then we know that they are going to have to define strategies with national objectives regarding the use of these market mechanisms for the implementation of the NDC and the increase of the emissions regarding the fulfillment of the NDC. So this implies the development of new policies, adopting new legislations for decision-taking processes on the participation of the countries and how they're going to define this monitoring process at a national level in each of the countries. Another topic that we have mentioned here is that we need to fulfill basic elements that were agreed by the parties under the COP26 regarding this package, this decision package. So we know that we have the experience in the application of market instruments in several countries of the region. Some of the countries do not have experience in the implementation of market instruments that are regulated. There is a very big experience in voluntary markets, of course, and this is limited to certain countries. And this is something that covers more because the fulfillment of this limit is not only for the participation of the cooperation focuses that are under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, but they make a synergy with important elements of the agreement in terms of ambition, in terms of fulfillment and transparency under the transparency framework of Article 13. And for me, a key message is that it shows us that we can have the best international practices that can be applied in participation of carbon markets at an international level. And what are these elements where we see challenges? We have to present reports of national inventories. We know that the countries must have capacities in terms of inventories. This is a key element in order to know about emissions, to see the NDC process, and to have an accounting process of the results that is transferred international, that is known as IBNOS internationally. The countries must also apply the adjustments. So this means that they must build an accounting system that is robust, and they must have reporting systems. This will include an additional report system that must be reported to the secretary through the PTRs that we know, but also through the database in order to have a traceability and to avoid a double accounting process, a double complaint process, but also to ensure environmental integrity and social sustainability. Also, authorization, the need that the countries have an institutional framework regarding certain issues in order to have a solid governance system for the implementation and supervision of these mechanisms, to strengthen national authorities that have been designated in order to have the capacity of being able to identify, to select activities, and to approve and reject based on the experience that the countries have in the MDL and how they were able to establish institutional networks for national approval. But this goes further than this because governments must be prepared to authorize these transactions without compromising to these goals. And all of this is framed in the availability of human resources that the countries have, which is critical. Majority of the countries from the Caribbean, such as very small states, SIDS, even countries from Central America have a very limited capacity to work on the climate change issues. A lot of times they have to take the role and to face different perspectives of the climate crisis in their countries. And at the same time, this adds up to the following up of the implementation of the MCDs, how it is being reported in the transparency biennial reports, and then the adjustments where they're going to need technical capacities to have additional personnel that can do these things. So I think that an important thing would be the language barrier, for example, because part of the role of having these regional centers is going to look at the fact that all this information is going to be collected in a language that can be understood by the country. Thank you very much, Anna, for your intervention. I think that we could look at different ideas that you mentioned. We can see the three phases of the process so that a country can be prepared to be ready regarding the frameworks, the transparency frameworks related to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and the voluntary carbon markets regarding implementation, follow-up, monitoring, and the availability of human resources. That was something that we just listened to and that we are conscious that it exists in our region. So for this reason, programs and projects that we are developing through our office and through other agencies of the United Nations are complementing these capacities that are local in the region in order to have very robust systems in order to have the correct implementation of the Paris Agreement and of Article 6. So in this sense, I would like to give the floor to Rocio Garcia. Rocio is an expert on finances in the UNEP network program for Latin America and the Caribbean. Rocio, I would like to complement a little bit the focus that we have been presenting regarding the network issues that has been coming up as an example, a clear example of how this could work correctly regarding cooperational focuses of Article 6, not only in Latin America, but also with other regions that are developed and that are underdeveloped in the world. So if you could please tell us a little bit in general terms, what is the team doing in terms of Article 6 and carbon voluntary markets? Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, for having us today, for giving us this space. Now, I was thinking that in a lot of cases, to be the last person is not a good news because a lot of people have already mentioned what you were thinking. But in this case, they have opened the door to different concepts and to several challenges that our countries are facing in order to implement Article 6. In this case, I want to focus myself in the forest sector and how Article 6 is considering it. And maybe the most important or the entry point to the forest sector for Article 6 is what a lot of people have been mentioning, which is this description of mitigation outcomes, which are mitigation results. This is taking us out of the reduction emission sphere that was being discussed finally in Paris. This was part of the text that was being discussed. If they were reduction emissions, because this second term allowed us to include within the spectrum of activities, some activities that are more linked to the forest sector. As we know, within Red Plus, we consider 5 activities. The first 2 activities are linked to emission reduction of gases. And then we have the Plus, that are activities that are linked to the conservation and to the improvement of natural reserves or natural carbon reserves. So these activities, or some of these activities, are considered as remotions, and the possibility of being able to talk about mitigation results is locating us, or is allowing us to consider these remotions under Article 6 and under Article 6.4. Before getting into further detail, it is worth mentioning that different than the clean development mechanism that has already been mentioned by several panelists. In the clean mechanism, we only included reforestation and non-forestation activities, that even though they are linked to the forest sector, they are the only activities that were allowed under this market, or under this big fulfillment market that was created in the Kyoto Protocol. So this is a very big important change, because Article 6 is opening the doors to the forest sector and gives a space so that this sector can be developed as part of the activities that would help to implement the cooperational focuses. If we go back to the reduction of emissions or remotions, what was considered in the clean development mechanisms was reductions. So in this point of the discussion, under Article 6, colleagues previous to me have reported in several ways and have highlighted several challenges that are being faced by the countries in order to implement this article, from the perspective of the accounting systems that are proper, from the perspective of social and environmental safeguards, as Sebastian was mentioning, for example, up to the validation and report mechanisms that each time are more demanding in terms of what is being requested. So this is not different from the forest sector, or to the forest sector. So for the forest sector, we are hoping for them to have some safeguard or additional considerations when considering the risks that the forest sector can bring because of its own nature. We know, for example, the permanence risk, the linkage risk that are linked to the forest sector, of course. What we understand with Article 6 and the opportunity here is to include the forest sector as a whole. And now, currently, within Article 6.4, we have been discussing what are remotions and how these remotions are being considered, or how these remotions would be considered, and what type of activities or remotion activities would be considered within the activities linked or that are allowed in Article 6.4. Last year, for example, the surveillance body for Article 6.4 developed a first conceptual note where it established, or what it made a proposal of a series of activities that would be considered as a remotion within the spectrum. However, the countries did not approve this conceptual note, and currently, in February, the parties were asked, for several considerations so that they can present their impressions on what are activities that are linked to remotion. Probably we had 8 submissions by countries, but we have about 20 submissions coming from other institutions that are interested in this. And I mentioned this one because we have Martin in the panel. I want to leave you here. I only want to compliment with part of the work that Yuma is doing in the region, linked with the role in Article 6 and in the forest sector. We have supported, with the work of the team, a submission of several countries of the region where they mentioned that what was considered as a remotion was linked to Red Plus, to this plus, and we considered, or it proposed, that Red Plus were not divided in reductions and emissions. That would be these two first ones. And these other three that are coming. But Red Plus has to be considered as a total package that will come into Article 6.4 as a whole. And that methodologies and the surveillance had to be considered within Article 6.4, taking into account the things that were approved in the Varsovia framework and agreement. Thank you, Rocio, for this intervention regarding the RED framework and the differences that we have within carbon markets in other sectors that clearly are present in our economies, as well as others that apply specifically to the forest sector or forestry sector. What you were mentioning regarding the reduction of emissions of Article 6.2 or 6.4, as well as validation and report mechanisms that are each time more demanding, not only for the forestry sector, but also for other sectors of the economy, such as the risk that is associated to the permanence and to linkage. Regarding these considerations, I would like to invite Daniela to share with us what would be the challenges that the countries have in terms of the construction of specific capacities, specifically regarding what is being included in Article 6.2 and 6.4 of the Paris Agreement, as well as opportunities that they find in this exchange of experiences regarding a regional mission for Latin America. Thank you, Billy. Thank you, everybody that are here, or all the people that are here with us in this exchange space. So, yes, we have a lot of challenges that have been identified in terms of the construction and development of capacities and skills. In order to start off, and I think Anna also mentioned this, the majority of these conversations and the majority of literature regarding carbon markets is done in English, and it is a very technical English and a very complex English. So this makes it a little bit more complicated because we have a language barrier here. So I think that it is very important to have spaces such as this one that have been organized by regional entities where we can start talking about these issues in Spanish. Also, the work that these regional centers are doing from the secretary. I think this is going to be very useful in eliminating the language barrier that is present. Conversation regarding Article 6 is not a conversation that came about from one day to the other. It has been a conversation that has been evolving for a lot of years, not only under the formal process of negotiations that were held regarding the rules and everything that was behind in order to define the Article 6 under Paris Agreement. But we have also had workshops, webinars, other type of sessions and conversations, even papers that have been written on different topics that are related to this article. And a lot of times I say that we have so much terms and acronyms that are associated to carbon markets, specifically regarding Article 6, that is almost as a new language. So I think it is important that in order to be able to implement this, all the actors that are going to participate know this new language and are able to speak it and are able to have a good conversation in order to look at this that can respond to this. What are we going to use these mechanisms for? There is another topic regarding the construction of capacities, and this is a challenge because there's a high technical personnel rotation because of the changes in government. So sometimes we have changes in the team that is responsible for these issues. So to stop this sometimes is a challenge. So we have to start to strengthen this aspect too. Another element that I think is a challenge, and here maybe it is more a long-term challenge, is the academic offer that we have for these topics. It is very difficult to find academic programs on carbon market topics. So it is important to strengthen academic sector because sometimes this is not mentioned, and the academic sector has a good opportunity to generate an offer that at the same time can develop long-time capacities and to make this critical mass of people that are tackling this topic is growing, and they have better capacities, or that has better capacities in order to face these challenges. And there is another challenge because there are few cooperation spaces between or among technical personnel that are tackling these topics. So at a higher level, maybe we are having a better cooperation, but there is an opportunity of having more cooperation spaces among people that are looking at this and in the implementation that is going on a daily basis, in order to have open and honest dialogues where we can generate this kind of support in order to solve these challenges that are there. So each of these challenges is introducing this opportunity, more dialogue spaces such as this one, more cooperation among countries, dialogue and technical exchange spaces. We could even think of doing visits or tours in order to know how in the different countries they are tackling these carbon market issues. And I also think that as a region, we have to strengthen this role that the academic sector has, not only from the offer perspective, but we have also mentioned the type of projects that are going to be able to be generated in the carbon markets. And I think there is a very strong call to innovation, and so that these actions are additional to what we're already doing. And the academic sector is a sector that can carry out a lot of research and development in these topics. So I think it is a good opportunity to involve the sector, the academic sector. Not only the OES, but also the Paris Agreement are doing this very strong call and big call to cooperation and coordination, not only among countries, but also looking at this internally between the different key actors. So I think that it is important so that they truly can develop capacities and skills that can ensure a proper implementation of these mechanisms. We must strengthen this cooperation, this multi-sectoral dialogue between the public sector and the private sector, social society, and academia, so that the implementation can take us to reach these goals, these national climate goals, and to ensure that the mechanisms can contribute to solve the problem that has us here today, that is to stop these greenhouse gas effects. Thank you very much, Daniela, for this intervention. I feel that this you mentioned regarding these academia sector is very important, because we don't have enough cooperation sectors between technical personnel that look at this topic with a lot of language barriers, not only because of the language that we use, Spanish and English or other language, but because of technical terms that are being used today. And these cooperation instances that we must follow, where we have to continue working on these, and with the readiness project and Article 6 that we are looking at, we have already been launching these recruiting processes, and we're going to start off officially in several months. So this is really focused on supporting countries, and this cooperational focuses that in the market sector are intrinsically of cooperation at a country level and also at a subnational level sometimes. So this you also mentioned regarding the research and the development is also key, and that it must be reinforced along with these alliances. It is a public-private process, and we have to look at this with several institutions of the academia. And this is why I thank you, and I thank Ana and Rocio for being here with us today in this panel. Unfortunately, because of time issues, we must go on to a question space, question answer space for the audience. And for this, I would like to take a moment in order to ask the question that was pending regarding the panel, and that is referring to the opportunities that we see for the South-to-South cooperation in terms of carbon markets regarding Article 6. Thank you very much. Thank you, Billy, to you. As you mentioned, we have this question and answer session, which is going to be moderated again by Emilia. So, Emilia, I'll give the floor to you at this moment so that you can take care of the question answer session. Thank you. Emilia, the floor is yours. Thank you, Daniel. I don't know who of the panelists would like to ask Billy's question. I don't know if you have the question there, Billy, so we can repeat it. Yes, Emily. it is which would be the opportunities that we're looking at. I think Daniela mentioned a lot of the challenges that we have regarding training of the professionals in the region. So, which are the opportunities that exist today, and what are articulation mechanisms, such as the academia sector, in order to satisfy the construction of skills and capacities that we have seen as a very big need in Latin America and the Caribbean region? Come on. Who can answer this question? I would like to ask the question to Ana Dominguez from the convention that I know is involved in the development of skills and capacities. So I don't know if you could tell us which are these opportunities. Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Billy. I did not have the opportunity to mention this, but I think I did mention it during the COP27. The secretary has a mandate that is issued by the parties launched a program, a work program for the development of the capacities of Article 6. This program is going to have a 5-year duration in order to break barriers and constraints in topics regarding to the construction and strengthening of these capacities so that the countries can be in optimal conditions in order to apply all of the cooperational focuses under Article 6. So we see a lot of opportunities in this preparation phase because there are a lot of countries that have taken advantage of this and could represent a way of looking at the pathway, or just opening up the pathway for other countries that are seeing if they can apply or not through these different focuses. We have very specific cases in the region, of course, in the development of pilot programs of cooperational focuses, such as the 6.2 regarding cases of Peru, of Colombia, that are advancing in the development. So I think that this is going to be an inflection point that is very important, where we're going to be able to capitalize and we're going to be able to generate the South to South cooperation among these countries that are advanced in this preparation or readiness phase, and that are going to be able to support those countries that are in earlier phases. So here, the collaboration regional centers play an important role in this office regional network of the convention, by being able to establish these links among the governments, among the academic sector, in order to enrich these experiences. Also, part of this program implies the development of guidelines and documents and rules that can facilitate the understanding of the parties in terms of decisions and climate negotiations that are taking as a starting point, the Article 6. So this strategic alliance with the academic sector and even with organizations that are much more present in the countries of the region is going to be key in order to be able to develop these tools that can clarify and help to have a greater understanding of the decisions, of group decisions. Thank you, Anna, for such a complete answer. So going on to the questions that are in the chat, we're going to look at the ones we can answer. But you can still send the questions, and clearly we'll make sure we can give an answer to you. So we're going to look at the questions that we can cover. So the first question will be for Martin. Could you please tell us which measures are being taken in order to avoid that the establishment of a jurisdictional market in the countries affects the voluntary market? Thank you, Amelia. I'm going to take advantage to mention something regarding Billy's question. A cooperation agenda, South-South, that is strategic, I think, and this point can be focused in the exchange of Latin America and Caribbean countries on the scope and the structure of regulation models that are being triggered. During the last 2 weeks, for example, Paraguay and Ecuador took out legislation on voluntary markets in relations with their protocols towards the fulfillment of Article 6. That is the convergence that I was mentioning, that is being given when national legislations are being developed. Brazil this month issued a legislation that is triggering voluntary market, allowing forestry concessions and carbon titles that come from these concessions. Colombia is discussing in the National Development Plan some market proposals on governance that were not approved, but it is a discussion that is still going on. So I think that this dynamic, this laboratory that we're having in Latin America and the Caribbean on legislation frameworks that are looking towards fulfilling, Article 6 is looking at the different legislations, but in its labor and its detailed description, it is taking decisions on voluntary market, thinking on which would be the alignment models and the interaction between baselines and the components of the development of safeguards. And these could be technical, concrete fields on which we can have the South-to-South cooperation. In the integration of the accounting process and responding to the question of what we can do in order to control the advance of jurisdictional schemes, the first thing that I'm going to do is to controvert this question or to refute it, because I don't think this is a correct agenda to stop the jurisdiction approaches or jurisdiction approaches. I understand that project execution and its accounting integration. So this is also something that is being mentioned regarding the accounting alignment, but it can generate problems when we don't have a good alignment system between the execution of jurisdictional schemes and the projects. But it is not a decision that has to be taken beforehand, because we would have to stop any jurisdictional approach in order to prioritize the project approach. But these are two different mechanisms. So these are mechanisms that are answering to different causes of deforestation, and these are mechanisms that should be complementary. So how could we do this complementary? That could be maybe the approach of the question. So the answer is in the systems that we use. Even though standards have been formulated, overall the jurisdictional approaches, we have had some lines on how to do this alignment. Also, national frameworks is where we should formulate this alignment models. In the Colombian case, we formulated some proposals that were not executed to 100% with the subtraction of project areas and participation of projects in jurisdictional systems. So here we have some references, but making a very brief summary, I think this is an issue that has to be solved from the legislation framework on the alignment without blocking any of the two visions. So we need the jurisdictional issues, but we also need the implementation of the projects. Thank you. Thank you, Martin, for answering this in such a complete way. The second question in the chat is for Susana. Can you please tell us which technological tools and indicators are applied in the measure in real time? And the measurement. Well, this will depend on the methodology that you are using and in the type of project. What is most common at this point are satellite images and the monitoring with drones and with images in real time or real-time images, but it will depend on the type of project. So a floor project cannot be monitored this way, so it will need, for example, some laboratory processes and some samples. So each project and each methodology has a monitoring process. We are trying to implement monitoring processes that are much more agile, that are much more that are cheaper, and that can allow us to do a double check of the data that is being generated in the fields. So there are a lot of methodologies. The geographical information systems, as I mentioned, is one of the most important ones. And we have been working with a lot of entities in order to see how we can make these systems cheaper and how projects can access a lot of the programs that can allow you to do this monitoring in a free way in order to cover all of the costs regarding monitoring and verification. Excellent, Susana. Very interesting, very interesting. And how you can help us in terms of monitoring. So the following question is for Rocio. Can you please tell us if the Forest Conservation can issue carbon credits and if there are investments in order to potentialize this, and who are the people that are responsible for this? In the region, we have a lot of experiences that are linked to conservation, of course, and as part of this methodology, we look at deforestation as limited deforestation. We also have credits that are linked to the approvals and to remotions that are also linked to maintaining and improving the forestry carbon stocks. But we have a lot of experiences in the case of Peru, the national protected and natural areas are allowing the emissions of the gas carbon and of voluntary markets. Currently, we have a debate that is going on with a lot of other countries on the possibility of selling these reductions in emissions and how would this mechanism be, or the mechanism through which these countries would benefit, if they should benefit of this sale. There are a lot of countries that have been discussing the possibility of charging some type of fee. There are even countries that are discussing the possibility that the sale is completely forbidden. So yes, it is possible to have the results of reduction of emissions and conservation strategies clearly regarding national protected areas. We have several methodologies that could be associated to these kind of practices. As I mentioned, eventually these practices or these mitigation results that are coming from these activities can be part of mechanisms within Article 6.2 or within Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. And responding to this other question that came up on the possibility that the countries can charge, for example, or can be part of the sale, the response is positive. A lot of countries consider this an environment so that these activities can take place. This is a position that has been supported by central governments. And taking this into account, they should also contribute partially to the fulfillment of the NDCs of the countries. So there is nothing that has been established yet, but the discussions are taking this into account every day. Excellent. Thank you, Rocio. And going to the last question, because we don't have more time. This question is for Martin or for Rocio, whoever wants to answer. Which actions are being triggered and you recommend in order to avoid, all of these different problems of the implementation in the Amazon region, especially for indigenous communities? I don't know, maybe Martin, taking into account you answered first. If COP is doing some specific studies in the Amazon region, I don't know if you want me to do a brief or general description of the responses. Maybe Anna can do this, and then I can make a focus on what we're doing in the Amazon region specifically. Is that okay with you? So Anna, I'll give you the floor. Okay. Basically, what I was going to mention, and is linked to the last question we had at the panel, I think that one of the main things in training, as Martin says, CCOP is working hand in hand with WWF in a project that is focused in the Amazon region. And what we're doing there is we're trying to understand what are the projects that are located in this area or in these regions, specifically network projects? What type of agreements do we have with these projects so that we can map what type of agreements we have and how they are so we can understand them and we can educate based on these projects, and based on this to establish a baseline in order to understand and validate the needs, with this baseline to understand the needs of the community at an experiential level regarding the reduction of carbon, and then to generate a training model so we can go to the communities, so we can go to the different associations depending on how they're structured at a regional level, and we can adapt these training models so that they can understand the topic not only related voluntary carbon markets, but also the distribution of benefits and the macro topic in a better way. I would also like to mention that something that we have to have in mind, not only regarding the capacities and training. What we're looking for with this project is to update, the guidelines that we just shared for the Amazon region, and we want to create a guideline for the Pacific region. And in this way, we are going to create this format or guideline that can be adapted to the different regions, not only a text or document as we see in the guideline, but we can also create a training model that can be replicated in different regions. And this way, we can reduce the risk and we can increase the knowledge on the different indigenous communities or vulnerable communities. So now I'll give the floor to Martin. I think that you just covered a great part of the answer to the question. I want to highlight that the communities in the Amazon region are different communities. Maybe the safeguard frameworks can be differentiated in the Amazon region. Mainly, we have indigenous communities where we have to see the level of the project. We also work with peasants that are the deforestation areas. So these are basically topologies that are different. So we are avoiding risk from the perspective of fair treatments and WWF agenda. We have to develop a detailed framework of safeguards. We think about fair treatments, but we end up giving specific recommendations for safeguards for specific communities in the Pacific region and specific communities in the Amazon region. And how we can consolidate this agenda. And the next month, we are basically going to knock at your door. Maybe we're going to look for Susana to tell her, hey, we have some ideas on how we have the work regarding data, regarding proposals in a very proactive way. And we're also going to go to the market readiness that you're structuring for all the region to see what we can find in regarding legislation frameworks of the countries. And in this pathway, we are going to propose an agenda to look at risks and at safeguards in a much more detailed way based on the data that we have regarding what is happening on the territories with these projects. Okay, thank you all of you for those complete answers and for the participants for the questions you included in the chat. I know that we cannot answer all of the questions, but you can still send me the questions that were pending to my email. Or if you want to write directly to the panelists, obviously they can answer the questions that were pending. I'll give the floor again to Daniel. Thank you very much. Amelia, thank you very much. We also wanted to thank you for your participation. We see in the chat that you still have a lot of questions regarding this topic. Maybe further on in this pathway towards COP28, we're going to do new events in order to answer to all the questions. Again, thank you very much for your participation. Please expect another transmission, another event towards the pathway to COP28. Thank you very much and have a good day.